Recording. Okay. And the first thing
Behaved now.
Yes, exactly. And the next thing we're going to do is make Katie the host. And by doing it that way, recording will just continue. And finally. Oh, shoot, Katie, now you're going to have to give me permission to screen share.
I already did it.
Oh,
I already did it.
You're really good at this. Okay. And so the previous discussion I had on this, as some of you are aware, I am located in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so by reading this paper, you may have to report me to the governor, but that's okay. I didn't realize when I picked this out, it was like, oh, flat out, oh, critical race theory. Like, oh, wow, that thing we've been talking about for like a couple of months. That was actually kind of exciting.
So Mike, I want to ask, would you like to be reported to the governor?
Nah, I've got better
Somebody's
things
got to take the lead on this.
Yeah, no, I just
Okay.
we are newly, as if you follow politics at all, we are newly in this path of this stuff all of a sudden not being acceptable, right? So so this paper I just provocative stuff to think about in terms of how, well, just the title, how Black science majors navigate the racial climate at a predominantly white institution. I am at a predominantly white institution, and so I found this especially interesting for my own experiences. I was skeptical at the beginning simply because they're basing all this off 34 people at a single school. However, when I dug into it, I was really intrigued by the underpinnings, the theoretical background to it, and the way in which the approaches were built off of that theoretical underpinning. So I was very intrigued by this entire paper in terms of what is being argued and sort of getting the message from the people who live it in terms of what is being done or what has been done to help people succeed in what can be an uncomfortable environment. Before you get into that, you get into the sort of factors supporting persistence both externally and internally. There's a good amount said here about HBCUs and the value of HBCUs. This is something that I admit I did not understand before actually visiting some HBCUs in academic business and sort of getting that sense of, having a comfortable environment, an environment that you wouldn't have to worry about all the other crap that goes on and just like express yourself as a scientist, not worrying about not doing the right things. I'm just seeing the quote right here. HBCUs let Black students live their best and authentic lives. And I really like the use of the word authentic in that particular sentence. Some of the internal things that they cite, frankly, aren't limited to Black students. I mean, the idea of self-concept, the idea of resilience, these are things that probably apply to most anybody. Now, there's another layer to it when it comes to representation of having these internal factors inspired by seeing those around you and understanding that people who look like you do the things that you want to do. But they also talk about people who can do cures, people who are involved in active learning, they're more likely to succeed. We know that, right? And that's not something that is race specific, nonetheless, something that is useful for sort of getting a complete picture of how these students are attaining success. Then we come to the idea of community cultural wealth. It wasn't until a couple years ago, and I got more into Deber work, but also had the opportunity to actually start evaluating some NSF proposals that I really got to understand and appreciate some of these theories. I mean, I was not trained in this, right? And so I've been learning on the go, like I think a lot of you had as well. And I'd known about cultural capital from previous work, the idea that if you are the child of two academics, that you're very likely to understand all the little intricacies and oddities of academia. And so you know who to talk to get things, you know how to navigate all the weird pitfalls, all that good stuff. it's an interesting interpretation here, directly based from critical race theory, of why maybe this isn't enough to think about these questions about Black success in a white environment. Deficit thinking takes the position that minority students and families are at fault for poor academic performance. So you don't know what you're doing and there's nobody to blame but yourself, okay? I'd never thought of it that way, right? And so critical race theory applied to this gives us this idea of community cultural wealth. And the idea, I blew past it, and if you'll allow me to go back here for a second, the anti-deficit approach. So the consideration of how this is done is related to this. Are we looking at it deficit or anti-deficit wise? They do a really nice job here of explaining what they mean. So rather than asking, why do so many Black students leave science majors, putting it in a negative perspective, you say, well, why do Black students that persist despite all the known barriers? So basically taking the question, flipping it on its head, and looking at the people who have quote unquote made it and using them as potential examples to be emulated. Katie and Carlos and I have been thinking about personas quite a bit, especially you, Carlos, I would say, right? With the grant. But that's sort of what we're getting at here, right? The idea of here are potentially personas of students that have succeeded, like what has allowed them to overcome these particular barriers. And these authors base it on this idea of community cultural wealth. I'm not just going to say, I have an advantage because of where I'm from. I have an advantage because of my background. Although if you look at table 1, that's certainly part of it. You see familial capital there as an example. Social capital, having these particular examples of things that come from your own previous experiences that have given you maybe particular advantages. But they add a lot more to it. Aspirational capital, navigational capital, resistant capital, other varieties of experiences, personality traits that allow you to not just resist barriers, but overcome barriers. What do you do when you encounter systemic racism, microaggression, something even more overt? And they give a couple discouraging examples in this paper. And how does one incorporate that into their own maybe teaching style? I will say one of the things I was wondering as I was reading this paper is how was it going to end? That they have all of these particular, here's these skill sets, here are these traits that they've discovered, but what is the discussion going to look like? And in fact, the discussion has some suggestions about what you and I could do to pave the way for more success of students in a minority situation such as this. But I think one of the big things to get out of this paper before we even dive into the interviews is this idea of community cultural wealth, the idea of these varieties of capital that are brought about by previous experience, but compositely are focused not just on scientific success, but also overcoming barriers that maybe people who are not in a minority situation don't even realize are there. So how do people react to these particular, let's call them pots of capital, and how they are related to each other, maybe related to your own experiences as an instructor?
This paper, I mean, it was nothing surprising for me.
I agree.
But it just made me so sad.
Yeah.
Because I always feel like, okay, like this is, I mean, it's great to hear about these success strategies that these students have found so that we know, like, and can value the strengths and assets these students are bringing. But also the sad part is where I'm like, but we've also created structures and classrooms where they need these, which is the part that makes me sad.
Yeah.
So.
And not necessarily intentionally so, right? Just things that have developed as a result of whatever cultural changes or revolutions have occurred. I will say something I find especially intriguing in this paper is I believe it's code switching, or not code switching. I did this last time I talked about it. What switching is it?
No, it is code switching.
Is it code switching?
Yeah.
Just the speaking in different ways to different groups of people. And I think I've actually seen this before. It's like one of those things that once you see it described in here, it's like, oh yeah, I think I've actually noticed that among my own students in the ways they might interact with another group of underrepresented students versus the way they would talk to me. And that goes beyond just simply the way a student would talk to a professor versus another student, right? A level of comfort maybe that exists with one group that doesn't exist with another, of these particular types of capital in terms of like, oh wow, I've noticed that. That's something in this paper I found especially interesting. And I thought it was really cool to sort of see the direct comments that some of the students were making with respect to their own experiences and how they might do something like that consciously. So you've got 34 students here, and you see the vast majority of them are biology majors. There's one physical scientist there in the middle. The female-male distribution, pretty much 2-to-1 women, which is sort of pretty much what you see in college nowadays. And you will see quite the mixture of self-reported ethnicity, be it Black, be it African-American, be it actually from an African country or a Caribbean country. So all across the board there.
You know what, Mike, sorry, just I have thoughts about code switching.
Please, yes.
You know, we all, code switching is interesting to me because on the one hand, we all do it, right? Like how I talk to my friends at the bar is not going to be how I get up on a panel at a professional meeting, right? It's not the same. So we all certainly code switch to fit the environment that we're in.
Fair enough.
The thing that is, I guess, saddening for me is that for some people, they feel that it is necessary to code switch in order for them to be accepted, in order for them to be able to get hired, in order for them to be able to get a good grade, like whatever it might be, that they code switch because of fear of the negative response to what they're doing, right? Because like, I mean, I have an advantage when I teach with my adult learners. After, you know, we've gotten to know each other a little bit better, I will be much more casual in the language I select,
me too,
or the way I speak to them. And I have no fear of them all of a sudden thinking, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yep, me too.
Right. But that is not the case for well, the students that we're talking about here today, right? Is they would fear that reprisal. And so I think that to me, like code switching on one hand is like, yeah, we all do it. But on the other hand, it's like, what's the negative pressure for having to do it and to have that sense is what, again, is saddening for me.
The other example in this paper, most of it has to do with code switching as it respects to speech, but there's also the example of the woman and the braids in her hair, which is its own form of code switching, a visual instead of a linguistic, but the same idea. Am I going to judge you on your appearance, in this case, a hairstyle? I have students, African-American students, who have made fairly drastic changes in their hairstyles over time. And I wonder how much of it's related to this kind of stuff. Like, you know, stereotypes are being held, what assumptions are being made. It's, again, as you point out, Katie, stuff that I don't think about, right? But then I see it in my students and it does make me think.
I would point out that a lot of the strengths that are mentioned in this article really, I mean, this is part of the anti-deficit lens of the whole article, that that the author team has chosen to posit these as strengths. Each comes with it a cost.
Fair enough.
And needing to constantly draw on and enact strengths is itself an exhausting way to move about in the world. So I think that that's just an important lesson to be thinking about, is yes, these strengths exist, but when you think about something like resilience in the face of discrimination, that's a strength. And it's like, why, but it's a strength, but it's one that emerges from oppression that shouldn't be there, right? To be resilient.
The idea that one has to
exhausting.
think about this stuff in the first place,
Mhm.
and that when I'm going through my life, I don't have to think about this, but yet other people, every word has to be carefully analyzed and monitored as it's being said. Yeah, exhausting is like the perfect way to put that. Okay. This is done by a pair of interviews, and there's a couple activities that are done in conjunction with the interviews to help guide the conversation. So in one instance, let me scroll back up to find it here, the card elicitation activity. So actually being given some particular prompts here in order to get people to think about their own experiences and their own attitudes of success. Because, not everybody is well versed in community collective approaches here. And so if I want my students to think about the particular ways they're successful, I might want them to give them some prompts, not to bias them, but to get them to think about their experiences in some deeper ways that maybe they hadn't before. And then in their second interview, they have this photograph approach where they're asked to bring in pictures that are related to their success, things that would define, right here, 5 to 10 photographs or a short video that reflected the factors that contributed to their success in the science major. So another opportunity for the students to, in some non-traditional ways, find ways to express how they are feeling, what has enabled them to have success in their field. Okay. And so those approaches from these interviews are what ultimately leads us to the data that we get. And Carlos, you would appreciate, I talked to Stephanie Matthews the other day, who's also working on our Vision and Change proposal, which is due in a week and a half. And Stephanie was really inspired by both the approach to what was done in here and I'm looking for the interview technique, the PAR, participatory action research, and the idea that what we're proposing to do in the Vision and Change proposal, for those of you not involved, we're looking to set up focus groups of PALM alumni connected to professional meetings to ascertain the influence of Vision to Change on PALM's success. Are we in fact doing the very kind of research here? We have the critical expertise. And so are we doing the very kind of research that's being utilized in this paper? And can we utilize that for our own proposal? And so Stephanie puts in like, oh, PAR, like another opportunity for us to like ground what we're looking to talk about a little more soundly, which is actually pretty exciting for us as well. Okay. So this is the part where I'm going to ask Katie, and Katie, thank you. This is the second time I've done this to you today, and I am, I know it's just a bad day. I greatly appreciate you doing this. Let me just say before I take off, I think a paper's successful when it makes you think and it's provocative. And like this paper made me stop and think so much about the people around me, the way I do things. So I found it a very cool paper to read and talk about for that alone, before we even get into the content. So thank you guys for coming and discussing this paper. I think it's really good for all of us. All right, Katie, thank you very much. And you guys have a good rest of your discussion.
Yes, Becca.
Thanks, Katie. I also wanted to say that the participatory action research here was just a really nice element of the study. And this is something that I've been studying recently. And part of what I find so compelling about the approach is that the participants get to lead the study questions, get to develop the study questions, which makes it really hard to write a proposal about, right? Because the study questions emerge from the study itself rather than the way we usually read a proposal, which is, this is what the study is going to be and this is how we're addressing it. But I think that I think a lot about this as I do more work around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is my own positionality as a white person and my tendency to lead instead of listen, which I think is something that you all have seen me do, something I'm working on. And participatory action research is a really helpful way to organize the participants leading instead of the facilitator leading. So I would love to talk about this approach more.
Yeah, sorry, I just popped into the chat there. I had done some collaboration this January with a person at the university who has done all this great work with first generation students. And this article it reminded me of the part of our article where she asked the students to take photos, right? And then to provide a narrative text with it. And again, with this idea of hearing our student voices in different ways rather than layering onto them our thoughts and ideas and assumptions, letting them lead us. And it was really interesting to talk with her about that and have her share about that. So I don't share.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I don't see you listed as an author on this particular study. Is there one that you've published as well?
Me? No, this is no, she did this work. Dr. Jenga here. Rashni is I don't know, she does all things first generation. She's like involved with these different programs, but she's also in our the University of Minnesota. She's in, I believe I'm terrible with acronyms, CEHD something human development. Organizational leadership. Yeah, she's got a lot of appointments as far as I recall. But yeah, she's the one that did the study, not me. I just she was helping me with our department retreat to do a DEI workshop. And by helping me, I mean she just nailed it. So I was like, that's great, you are amazing. So I'll just listen.
I can't remember if you need to play the publication game. But CourseSource has their professional development teaching. So that DEI lesson that you just alluded to might be something you could write up for CourseSource.
Look at you. I've already got a CourseSource on the docket for my Palm Fellowship that I haven't gotten my act together. And I kept pushing for the writing retreats. I don't know if any of you, as part of Palm, I got the writing retreat emails, but that's my fault. I was like, I just need a few days. Pay me.
I know, right?
I just need
yeah. Well, if you also need an accountability buddy, let me know.
Well, hoping I'm like 80% of the way done with this dang article, but it's been over a year since I've been able to sit down on work on it. So
I hear you. At the Gordon conference, I gave a workshop about women in STEM.
Yeah.
And Erin Vinson suggested I submit it to CourseSource. And so like one of the afternoons of the Gordon, I just went back to my dorm room and I was like,
just gonna make this now.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe since I'm 80% of the way there, if I wrap her up while I'm at this workshop, maybe I can get started on that. I also love CourseSource. And actually, it might be a good place. I've been thinking about where I would put my DEI department meetings. I lead monthly DEI department meetings. And my hope is to just like have people be able to just pick up, copy paste, or maybe tweak for their purposes, but like hoping to just have it be like, here, world. So anyway, yes, the article. I have to say, like, I am always very interested in hearing and reading from student voices. Any student who's willing to share anything with anybody, like, I want to read it and listen to it. But I keep coming back to it from like, but they shouldn't have to be. They shouldn't have to be so resilient. They shouldn't have to use all of these amazing skills that they have developed. But like, why? But why do they have to? And I keep being, and that's my major issue with like a lot of the articles. I would say they were very much more popular about 10 years ago, where they were asking people to do like growth mindset intervention and value affirmations and all of these interventions to the students. And I'm like, but the students aren't the problem. Like, my class or our major or this college structure, we're the problem, right? We shouldn't have to do this strategy every semester so that our students can survive our course and our major and our institution. Like, think how much time we'd have to spend if we didn't have to do these interventions, because we've done a better job. So I don't know.
I totally agree with you, Katie. And the Damani White Lewis and his collaborators, they just published another paper in LSE about culturally aware mentoring. And they were talking in a webinar this morning about it. And one of the tensions that I think emerges from this kind of research is when do we help students change their approach for success, which is fundamentally an assimilationist approach, versus when do we change the system? And I think that the sadness that you're expressing is getting right at this issue, right? We shouldn't need to be telling students that they have to behave differently in order to succeed. Right. And this is like when I think about decolonizing education, this is the biggest challenge, right? You can change your curriculum all you want, but if you don't change the behaviors, then it's still colonial. On a happier note, this is like my world's colliding right now. So GA, it's so nice to see you here. And Greg and GA and I are all part of the biology learning teaching community here at UW. And hopefully we'll see each other later today for that meeting. And then it's the POM world too. And it's just lovely to see you all in one place.
Just a big old spider web. I feel like this should be required. I feel like this article for me, like I said, it's not sharing anything new, but I love the way it's presented. And I want it to be like required reading for everybody, but certainly for like postdocs or grad students who are thinking they might go down this education route and become college educators. Because I feel like I would say I spent the first 4 years of my teaching career just trying to figure out like how to teach. Like, how do I design a course and how do I put materials together? And oh my God, I have so many new courses. And then I got past the 4 years and I took a breath and I looked up. And then I feel like I spent like the next 4 years just like slowly dawning on me that like, the way we've been doing things kind of sucks. Like it was like a slow dawning. And now like another 4 years, I'm in my 12th year of teaching, another 4 years. And I feel like, well, I feel like I'm in the place where I've already expressed where I am. And all the things I see just keeps making me be like more and more motivated to dismantle the way we've been doing things. But like, I wish it didn't take me 8 years to get there. So, plus.
Katie, I hope you don't feel too sad about the what you perceive as a really slow progression. I was just sort of reflecting the other day about I finally feel like I have a really good idea in terms of teaching biology well, but it came 17 and a half years after my PhD. So like, that's my pace. Like after 17 and a half years, I had an idea. I was like, I can plant my flag down. Like, I feel good about this one. 17 and a half years. So if you're at year 12, you're like racing ahead of my tempo.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say, but I guess I'm also just like, damn it, why didn't I just, I took preparing future faculty at the University of Minnesota. Like why didn't I get to why didn't I get to start thinking about these things then? Why did I begin to structure my courses in a way that doesn't really serve all of my students? And now I have to go back and break it down and rebuild it in a better way. And I'm just like frustrated that I'm assuming happens to almost everybody. And maybe never to some people. Maybe they just never even get to that point, right? Which is also terrible. I should point out that I'm actually a very optimistic person. I'm able to live in paradox where I am like, this sucks, and I have hope. Just want to say that. I'm not all doom and gloom.
Well, in 2022, if you can't compartmentalize to some extent, you'll never get anywhere, right? Like, I mean, talk about survival mechanisms.
That's as the yeah, that's really coming home to me today, Greg, in a fundamentally new way, because I've been so upset about, of course, about all the anti-critical race theory legislation, but as the parent of a kid who's non-binary, the stuff that's going on in Texas and Florida right now terrifies me to the point where it's getting really hard for me to compartmentalize. But I wanted to piggyback on something that you said, Katie, about like, how do we, and GA, what you chatted in, like, how do we start thinking about inclusive teaching right from the beginning of our careers? And I listen, Shavella Pittman has a podcast called Teaching in Color. You've listened to it, Carlos?
I haven't, but I love podcasts and I'm rapidly searching it in my.
I think she
I listened to a podcast and just really inspiring and conversational. And I went back to our DEI committee and I was like, we need her to give a workshop. And she came and gave a fantastic, really very transparent and a conversational workshop that really was intense, but also really, really approachable. It was really good.
That's great to hear. So there aren't that many episodes of the podcast, and I whipped through it last weekend. And one of the like all of the episodes, and one of the things that she talks about is the failure of teaching and learning centers to support faculty of color, because the focus of teaching and learning centers is, there are so many problems that people with majority overrepresented identities struggle with, that just by virtue of numbers, those are the teaching techniques that, the teaching problems that get addressed in a teaching and learning center, and that teaching and learning centers don't necessarily have expertise to support faculty of color. And so she really emphasizes the need for consultation outside of the university. And I think a huge weakness in the literature, and one of the things that I'm excited about with our IU's project, is that we think about how to be inclusive for our students without considering how the differences in our instructors change the delivery and acceptance of different teaching techniques. So Pittman has an article that just came out in the Chronicle last week, where she's like, you know, there are all of these great teaching practices out there, but they're really harmful for faculty of color.
You're right. You brought that up in a meeting I was in, and with you, and I read it, and it's an amazing article.
It's an amazing article.
Oh, so good.
I wish it were more data driven, but I think that that's kind of the point, is that the data aren't necessarily systematically collected yet.
Mm-hmm. So, Gia, I've never met you before. Hi. So you're in your second year of teaching, huh?
Yeah, I'm a postdoc, and I taught for only summer quarters. So last summer quarter was my first one. This summer quarter, I'm gonna do another course. So to teach me becoming the only instructor, that was the first time. So I did a lot of, like helping teaching and teaching assistants. But yeah, it was really eye-opening. Yeah. So I'm in a Hispanic serving institute. So I'm at UCI, University of California, Irvine. So my postdoc lab is still, so I'm affiliated to my postdoc lab in UW Seattle, but I'm here down as a visiting scientist physically for the last 2 years. And I got the opportunity to teach during the summer. So that was intro bio. And especially during the summer, there's a lot of students who failed in the normal quarters. Also, some students who want to change their major, but need to get the prerequisites. So there were a big mix of the population. So the testimonies that I read through this paper is actually really, an opportunity to really get into their minds a little bit. So here it's more focused on the Black community, but I feel it is shared with students with color, and especially the first generation students. They have, so in my office hours, I realized that there is this huge, discrepancy between the really good students who do excel, especially the summer quarter is shorter, and there's, it's easier to get good scores if you can. But for the students who have, family obligations and they don't have the sense of belonging, I didn't realize that was such a big thing in student mentality, especially for their first years. So what I see from their, their interviews, it really helps me understand what might be, what they might be going through, they're struggling. So I wanted to say the discrepancies I had. So I first installed one Zoom meeting, and it was, I think, at 11 a.m. or something like that. And I had so many emails that I have to work at that time. And so I installed another one at 6:30 p.m. That was the time that met for the people who couldn't come to the 11 one. And I was first, like complaining that like, I don't want to do another one, but I realized for the 631, there was a huge, like difference in the population who comes to the 11 one, the normal one, and the one that comes, later. And they were like, working at the same time, had to like rush home to get into that like Zoom office hour to get their questions answered. And sometimes there's not many students, and some people, like some students wanted to like linger back after we addressed all the questions that they had. And then they would just talk about themselves, and like what their family is like, how they were on and off of school for a long time, went to like several community colleges, and finally like getting into a 4-year institute, and like want to pursue a nursing, whatever, like that they like, just talking about themselves. And I didn't have to do anything, just listen. And, and they liked, those case study questions and things like that, because it makes them think, oh, these will be the cases that I'm going to be dealing with, after I pursue my career in nursing or something. So those were like really, I think it was really valuable, to have those connections. Yeah, it just reminds me of like my certain students that I had to, like, I got a chance to interact more during that quarter, reading all of these like little, testimonies. Yeah. Pretty cool.
Do any of your institutions have like an Instagram account for like, Black at or BIPOC at or whatever?
I should check it out.
Yeah, you should check it out. You can get hear some student voices there too, as well. Yeah, I agree with what Becca said. So good job to you. Right? If Greg, was no offense over there being a turtle, and I was maybe like a mild jog, no, I think you're really racing ahead, and I think that's great. No offense, Greg.
No, I take it as a compliment. Yeah, I just wanted to echo that sort of the value of kind of listening into the student voices, and where you just went with that, like the Instagram account, actually parallels a point I was going to make, which was, I feel like for me personally, one of the main values of Twitter, that, crazy cesspool of anger, has been just, hearing certain Black voices about like their everyday encounters with racism. Becca's colleague Thelma being one example of someone who sort of tweets about this stuff. And so this paper was for me another opportunity to just kind of listen in to those who were willing to sort of share their experience. And that willingness is important because, I've learned that it's not fair to just like go up to Black people and say, like, tell me about racism, because, it's not their job, right? They don't owe you that. But people who do want to share this stuff, it's great to have that chance to listen and learn about what it's like to be in their shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, I not academic in any way, shape, or form, but for anybody else who loves podcasts, how excited I just got. I was like, the podcast, yes. There's a podcast called Girl Trek, and it's these two Black women who have been friends for decades, and they just wanted to get Black women out walking. So that's like the initial motivation. But then they pick a Black person in history, mostly dead, some still alive, and they talk about them within like this movement, and then they just like share stories and how they connected to this historical figures, or and it, much like what we're talking about here, it's like the opportunity to hear those voices from people who are willing to share without having to burden people of color in our lives. And I have valued that podcast so much. They're so great to listen to, and to just kind of get to be, I don't know, open to hearing that. So if anybody else like podcasts, Girl Track is great. Not just for women, guys can listen to. And they don't just talk about Black women, they talk about all. So.
I really didn't know like very much. I wasn't aware about this, like code switching. That's one thing I really learned new from this article. That I didn't know that was such a thing, and it's a totally new, feel in here, like the totally new information for me here. Yeah. So I still don't get like why that even matters, like why code switching matters in teaching. Why is that so important in understanding the students? Because it's just understanding the way that the students communicate, or would it be? I see. Yeah, it's like this is a totally new field for me.
Gia, we were talking about that a little bit earlier, and
Oh, I see. Didn't we
don't
start
worry.
at 11:30? Am I late? Or was it?
That's okay.
Was it? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry then. I can watch
I
the
just want to.
recording later.
No.
No.
Oh, okay. There were 2 different times posted. All right. No. So what I mentioned is, I think the reason students feel they need to code switch, or really any person of color or minoritized identity, is because they fear negative repercussion. Like if I speak in the way that I would speak to my friends, then this professor won't take me seriously, or they might grade me differently, or I won't be able to get that summer research position. And so I think the code switching is because of fear of the negative repercussion. But like you said, and like I expressed, right, like that sucks. Right.
So that's the thing. So I think I do code switch too, because like America is not my first, like cultural homeland. And I always thought that that's a good thing, that I can switch myself to be, more professional, or being more, I don't know. So I didn't know that can be a negative thing, but I really do like now think that if I can, like express myself as I'm like really thinking, then that would be so much more easier. And I didn't even think about that. It would be so nice to do that. Yeah. But yeah, totally. The negativity.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that so often we internalize white supremacy. And it can take a social scientist, the social science research, to point out I think about one of the ways the Me Too movement affected me was just thinking about the number of times as a teenager and young woman, I got whistled at walking by construction sites. And I just thought I just thought that's part of what being a woman is. It didn't occur to me that could not happen. And then I started, just thinking about the amount of sexual harassment and gender-based discrimination that I've experienced, and just started to imagine what would life have been like without these things. But it took a social movement for me to really start trying on these ideas with any kind of seriousness. Right. So yeah.
So that's really eye-opening, that like I thought that was a good thing, and whoever couldn't code switch properly is not being trained properly or something like that, but now I understand from today that it can be, it's based on the fear of being perceived negatively. And as an instructor, it's really important to understand that and let them, feel more natural, and, so that they can just do whatever, show their own capacity, not, having always a discount on whatever that they would naturally, doing. Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to remember that, even if as an instructor, we're trying to create this environment where students feel like they don't need to code switch, right? Like we're not the only people
Mhm.
in the room, right? So their peers may be, and enforcing certain behaviors as acceptable or as not acceptable. And I think that's particularly powerful in our primarily white institution STEM classes, right? Where they talked in the article about being the only one or one of 5 in a group of 200, and how no matter how warm and inviting and inclusive you are, right, the space may never feel that way to these individuals. Yeah, it's a good, but that's what I was listening, but I was like, where's that dang book?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that that's an important piece to remember, is like we can set up these frameworks as best as possible to create an inclusive environment, to differing success, I'm sure.
That's great. I put down like all the notes for the podcasts and also this book. This is great.
Yeah, and the great part about the book too, for those of you that don't have a lot of time, is not super big.
Okay. Good. Even better.
Carlos, we haven't heard much from you. I would just love to hear your thoughts.
You made me think, and I got a little sidetracked with core source and the professional skills. And I'm like, I wonder if that should be like a full professional skills activity where we all discuss code switching and really discuss the good and not the good and the bad, the different scenarios and when it's used and why it may be used, and if we're doing it, then to reflect a little on it. I'm like, that would be an interesting, and I think it's professional development, an interesting activity. The other thing I was thinking about was, how much data do we have on the impact in the classroom and outside, like mental health or stress? And I don't think we have much.
I wonder what we can change in our rubrics to not, only say that these certain ways of saying the answers are correct or something, and be a little bit more like open to the other, to not, force them to code switch as much, like if it's not necessary. Because now I'm like reflecting like my life, like what I said all to my students when I was like even a TA, and then just like, this is the way that we do presentations, this is the way that is professionally, this is just in the science like STEM field, this is, and just making everybody like fitting to that figure that might not be even necessary at some points, right? So like talk slowly, but not too slowly, and also like using and like the certain ways that white Americans use that might have been perceived myself as the pinnacle, and we're all like trying to get fit towards it. So as an instructor, I don't know if there is one thing we can change. What might be, or just giving a chance to just be themselves, like because it just challenges me so much on how much I think that is the goal that we're all trying to achieve. Like even when you're searching for a job, like this is for college students, but like us in academia, that we go for a job search, there are these, chalk talks and, and those like seminars and interacting with the faculties. Like you try to be as much as white American, I think, like I do, just like the way that we communicate, the etiquettes, like things like that, the food that we choose, all those things. And that's like all been trained like all throughout, I guess, my training. And like, even, I don't know, I'm just like not very like, well, like, I don't know what I'm even saying, but those like, even, all those things, like those are all incorporated. So I just wanted to share one thing that I did in my last course that my POM mentor, Ellie, has suggested, and that was Science Spotlight activity. So, like that resource that was, that has, the profiles of the scientists that are counter stereotypic figures. And so the activity was really simple, that I asked the students to go to that website. We didn't even learn much because it was the beginning of the course, and they were able to search whatever keyword they wanted to. And I told them, like, if you don't know what you want to do, you go to the syllabus and just pick whatever that looks interesting to you. And then or if you have like family history of diabetes, then you might be wondering who did diabetes research, And then there were like 3 simple questions of like, why did you pick that person? What would you talk to that person if you got to meet them in like, in real? Or, and the last question was, what was the struggle that this person had to go through, like in their life or something like that. So, and I got like really, really great feedbacks from that, from that activity. I did like a survey at the end, and like I had 4 discussion activities, and one was like really on race, but they appreciated the scientist spotlight much, much more than the genetics on race or like that activity. It was, I think, so it just made me like really appreciate this like idea of sense of belonging is so important for their like engagement of the whole course. And I really think if I didn't do that at the very beginning, the students wouldn't be as open to me like throughout the whole thing, because I had a lot of like essay type activities. So I wonder, but while even they were saying that, so this is another thing. So I was like thinking about the rubric, and it all like went to this thought that when we're giving out the rubric, I also learned from the POM that transparency is important, and a lot of times giving them a sample answer is good, so that the students know exactly what they're expected, like how, like what is the, but I am now thinking, am I giving them like an example to reinforce them to not be themselves? And, oh really? Okay. Bye, Becca. Yeah. I'm sorry. Did we start at 11, not 11:30?
We
Was it?
did.
Oh,
Becky
really?
said something about there being some miscommunication. in the
Oh,
training.
gotcha.
Maybe
So
there
that
was
makes
some-
sense. All right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Don't apologize. It's not your fault.
All right.
Also, we all have so
Anyway,
much stuff anyway.
sure. So, but anyway, this has been like really eye-opening for me. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, or anything last thoughts? Since I'm the one technically hosting the meeting now. Gotta
That's
ask.
Gotcha. Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, Gio, it was nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Hopefully I'll see you in other things.
Yeah, and other things. We have all right. Thank you, Katie.
See ya.
Bye, Greg. Bye, Carlos.
Everyone, thanks.